We're going to continue our tours of divisions, saving the best for last, the AFC South. The Houston Texans, interesting narrative about this team. They finished 10-7. They won a playoff game going away against the Chargers, gave the Chiefs all they could handle. Yet in the middle of this season for them, it was considered a massive disappointment, at least offensively. So much so, their offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowick, who at one point in time was a trendy head coach candidate, got fired as their offensive coordinator. So life can come at you pretty quickly in the NFL. No better example of that.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it still says a lot about the Texans that last year felt like a massive disappointment, felt like, outside of the defense, everybody took a step back offensively, maybe with the exception of Nico Collins, but especially CJ Stroud, right? I mean, this is a guy who was getting MVP votes as a rookie. And you're thinking, okay, the sky's the limit. He might be entering that elite tier already, was certainly being drafted as such, Jeff, in fantasy leagues last year, which we cautioned against. And I will say, I think the pendulum has now swung too far the other way. I mean, CJ Stroud is like the QB 17 in some ADP that I've looked at. I still think he's somebody I'm fine. If I'm waiting on quarterback later in a draft, you grab CJ Stroud late, you pair him with another quarterback, and you kind of play the matchups week to week. I think there's a really good chance he bounces back this season. But what it's going to come down to is the offensive line, right? I think we can point the finger at CJ Stroud and say, oh, he regressed in year two. I don't know how much that's really the case. I think the O-line was a massive, massive issue for the Texans. It got worse and worse as the season went along. And how did they address that? Well, they traded away their only really good offensive lineman in Laramie Tunsil, who's now with the Commanders. So there's a lot of projecting to do when it comes to rebuilding that offensive line. Like, you just got to get it back to essentially league average. Like, we're not asking for this to be a top 5 offensive line in the NFL, but it can't be, bottom 5, bottom 7 like it was last year. So that's the big question mark for the Houston Texans. I like what they did to revamp this wide receiving core. They let go of Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. Maybe he doesn't play this season, but you bring in a steady veteran in Christian Kirk, a guy who does albeit have an injury history, but if he stays healthy, I really like him as a number 2 behind Nico Collins. And then you go out and get Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel in the draft, taking shots on 2 high upside wide receivers. So I'm pretty optimistic that this could be a nice bounce back for the Houston Texans. As much as my heart wants to take the Jaguars to win this division, Jeff, I know better. I have been conditioned. I have been beaten down as a Jaguars fan. I still think Houston has the highest floor in the division. You could sell me on the ceiling for the Jags, but if I'm betting anybody to win the AFC South, it's still Houston at plus money.
Yeah, me too. To that end, I think you liked the Houston to win the AFC South bet. I like the Houston over 9.5 wins at plus 100. I think, you're getting a higher payout for winning the division. You can maybe sneak in a little bit of a lower floor by getting to 10 wins. So a couple of different ways that could go there. So it's very interesting. They could very well win the division at 9-8 though, and so you could still get that.
That's the thing. That's why I like the division bet better. Is that this could absolutely be a division where 9 wins gets it done.
Yep, and you're getting a little extra juice there, plus 110 versus plus 100 too. So shop around as always. And the thing is, I love this defense. This defense is loaded. Great secondary, great pass rush, 2 great pass rushers. I think that's the thing that gets me there, is that I think this defense is great. It's not the best schedule, but it's not a terrible schedule. They do face the NFC West. I don't like that. The NFC West, AFC West, that makes it very tough. Also makes it other teams in the division have to play those teams though too. Let's move on to the Colts. 8-9 last year. When you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. They have 2 quarterbacks right now battling for the job. Anthony Richardson versus Daniel Jones. The over-under is on this one is set at 7.5, minus 110 each way. A lot of changing things going on, including Jim Irsay passing away, their owner, suddenly this summer. So team really much in a state of flux. They could go a lot of different ways here.
They could, and I think it's more likely that we see the downside version of this season for the Colts than the upside. And when we're talking about the upside, like what is that actually? Is it 9 wins? Is it 10 wins at the absolute most? Maybe you get a slightly more favorable kind of rotational schedule given where they finished in that division last year, but it's still an 8-9 team in 2024. They've basically been in that range for most of the last 4 years. They've won 8 or 9 games in 3 of the last 4. And, the quarterback situation is a potential disaster, or in my opinion, maybe a likely disaster, right? Where you have this quote unquote steady veteran in Daniel Jones, who, I think in a best case scenario is like the 22nd best quarterback in the NFL. And then you have the upside guy in Anthony Richardson. look, I think the Colts have to recognize where they are as a franchise. This is not a roster that's a quarterback away, right? It's a solid roster. It's not a bad roster, but this is not a situation where you say, man, if we can just get steady quarterback play, we can make a run. I think they owe it to Anthony Richardson to try to develop him, right? You drafted Anthony Richardson
Agreed.
knowing that he had very limited experience at the college level, knowing that he was going to be a project, and they haven't handled him as such. Like they've handled him as if he was this NFL ready guy. They've had this short leash, they've come down on him for these small minor infractions. And look, part of it is on Anthony Richardson, right? We can question the work ethic. We can question the commitment. Obviously injuries have been an issue for him as well. But I think they're going to end up starting this season with Daniel Jones, because this is always one of those teams that wants to keep a reasonable floor. They always want to win as many games as they can, even if there's no real payoff for that. But you owe it to your franchise. You owe it to Anthony Richardson to try to develop him, to tell yourself, is he the guy, right? At least get an answer on this. And we're going into year 3, still not knowing if that's the case. Given the level of investment, you took this guy with a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. It just doesn't really feel like they've given him a fair chance.
I 100% agree. 100%. I hate how they've handled this whole situation from the word go. I mean, I think he should have had his redshirt year, his rookie year, but they didn't do that. They did this little helter-skelter way. They still bury him, like the whole he needs to show more leadership. I mean, maybe they're not doing it now, but the way they handled the whole situation with him taking himself out the field, yes, it was inexcusable. It was terrible. Find a way to cover for him a little bit there, but no, they didn't. Instead, they chose to throw him under the bus, and it didn't work as Flacco is worse. Just also remember the defense lying down against the Giants in week 16, must-win game.
Yep.
They had the tiebreaker between they remember the way they gave away the Denver game too, but they had the tiebreaker between the Bengals and between the Miami Dolphins, but they just laid down the stretch. New defensive coordinator this year, odd team, could go a lot of different ways, most of them bad. Let's keep rolling. We don't want to deny you your Jaguars talk. Rough year, 4-13 last year. Everything went wrong. Trevor Lawrence got hurt. We have a new head coach, Liam Coen. Everybody's excited about it. It's about time you finally get a quarterback, an offensive-friendly head coach. I like that here. How optimistic are you? They have a win total project over under a 7.5, minus 125 to the over. What say you, Nick Whalen?
I am psychologically predisposed to not buying in on the Jaguars. I understand the optimism. This has been a pretty rough, 15, 20 years for those of us in Black and Teal Nation here. So it does feel to me like they're finally moving in the right direction from a coaching perspective, right? Liam Coen has not coached a game as an NFL head coach or as the Jaguars head coach, and yet I'm pretty comfortable saying he's probably the best coach that Trevor Lawrence has ever had. Given when you look at the other options, right? I mean, his relationship with Doug Peterson, had clearly kind of fallen out over the last couple of years. We can go all the way back to Urban Meyer and that disastrous rookie year. So, we never thought we'd be in this position with Trevor Lawrence, at this point in his career, going into year 5, still wondering, is this guy actually good? Is he better than an average quarterback in the NFL? The Jags gave him the contract. They're betting that he will turn into that player. And I think this is going to be the make or break year, right? If it's one thing to look back and say, all right, well, maybe we can blame Doug Peterson. We can blame Press Taylor. Certainly you can blame Urban Meyer for the way Trevor Lawrence's career began, but everybody respects Liam Coen. We saw what he was able to do in Tampa Bay. He comes from that Sean McVay tree with the Rams. Everything is set up now for Trevor Lawrence to finally become the guy that we thought he could out of Clemson. And if it doesn't happen this year, I think you have to have real concerns about that contract, real concerns about the direction of this franchise. So you look at the win total at 7.5, it's minus 125 to the over. I think I would go over on that, Jeff. I think they get to 8 wins. But as you know, I like the Texans to win this division. I'm not taking Jacksonville there. And this is not an overly easy schedule, especially at the beginning of the season for the Jaguars, Jeff. That's what concerns me. This is a team that when things go wrong, they don't have a way to kind of stop that runaway train. We've seen that year after year. And if they get off to a slow start, if they're 2-3, even 1-4 through the first 5 weeks of the season, I don't know that I trust the Jaguars to get this thing back on the tracks.
Yeah, we spoke earlier in the week about the Bengals, how important it was for the Bengals to play well against the Jaguars in week 2. But same said for the Jags. I mean, starting off Carolina at Cincinnati, get that home game against the Texans in week 3, because it gets toughens up after that at San Francisco, home against the Chiefs. It does pick up. So, yeah, they need to get off to that head start. All right. Don't want to shortchange the Tennessee Titans too much. Number 1 overall pick, Cam Ward, probably starting from day one. Total of 5.5 in some places, 6.5 in others for their betting profile there. Where are you on the Tennessee Titans going into this year?
I wouldn't touch the win total. I'll tell you that. It's probably an under or nothing for me, especially if you're getting it at 6.5. I know that'll be, pretty heavily juiced to the under. Schedule is relatively favorable. This team, as far as, a team that's coming off of picking number 1 overall, I think there is a reasonable amount of talent on this defense. I thought the defense probably outplayed that talent last year, but this season's all about developing Cam Ward, and I think what you don't want to do is turn this into an Anthony Richardson situation where you put expectations on him right away. We're going to see Cam Ward, as a starter in week 1. And I think this is one of those years where you kind of just let it ride. You live with the results. There are going to be some struggles likely early in the season, but you're hoping that you have your version of Jaden Daniels. And we'll see if that's ultimately the case on Cam Ward. But this is basically a gap year. It's a developmental year for the Titans. An exact result in the playoffs, the Houston Texans to lose in the divisional round at plus 450, play it or pass it.
So, we both like the Texans to win the division, right? So that means they get a home game, at worst in week 1, in the first round of the playoffs in the wild card round, which means they open the playoffs at 4:30 on Saturday Eastern time. Probably win that game at home and then go to Kansas City or Buffalo or Baltimore, and then they meet their maker there. I think that's the path. Yeah, I hate these exactas, but plus 450 sounds pretty good. What happens though? Say if they actually kind of run through the division, they run through their schedule, they're like 13-4, they get home field for the next round. And stranger things could happen there. That'd be that's one of the ways that could be the fly in the ointment there. But yeah, I actually, I don't look to bet these props, that specific type of prop, but yeah, it's a pretty decent price if you're into that sort of thing. Yeah, it's a pretty good price.
I'm with you, man. That feels like the kind of predictive result for the Texans this season. This feels like a divisional round loss ceiling type of team. I do think, like you laid out, there are so many machinations where this could go wrong. Plus 450, a fair enough price. I think what would worry me is that, that matchup in the wild card round, if they are indeed a wild card team, you might be facing the Chargers, the Broncos, the Bengals, a team like that. In which case, I'm not sure you would feel great about them even winning that game. But nonetheless, a fun prop to bat around at plus 450. The Colts to finish 3rd in the AFC South at plus 235. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think they probably finish 2nd or 3rd. So you're getting better than 2-1. Yeah. Again, I don't dabble in these sort of markets, but if I did, this seems like a good price. I think between the Jaguars and the Colts, it's a pretty close call to see who's the second best team in the division. And I might be unfairly maligning the Tennessee Titans. I mean, Cam Ward could be great in his rookie year. And if he is, that's a pathway there to kind of upset the apple cart here. The Colts are a very volatile team. You look at this team, they have a really decent pass catching room between the 4 receivers and Austin Warren at tight end. I like a lot of things there that they have put together. Jonathan Taylor is a very skilled running back, but there's a lot of things, quarterback, it all starts at quarterback there. So yeah, I think this is a reasonable bet. Let's get one more Jags one in here. Longest regular season winning streak over 3.5 games at plus 200. I see that you have a specific time period in mind for this to hit this streak.
Yeah, well, we talked about the early season schedule for the Jags. I don't think there is a 3-game winning streak coming at any point early on, really over the first half of the season. If this is going to happen, Jeff, it's going to be weeks 12 through 15 when they play the Cardinals, the Titans, the Colts, and the Jets in successive games. Now, would I actually bet this at 2-1? I would not. I think there are more creative ways to generate value on this Jaguars team, but for the sake of this exercise, I will play it because I think all of those are winnable games. I think if they could just survive that early season schedule, you don't have to go 5-1 through your first 6 games, but just go 3-3, even 2-4. That might be fine given some of those matchups and really start to make hay at the end of the season. What they can't do is, limp into the end of the season. Trevor Lawrence is banged up. Nobody's feeling good about this offense. They have to find a way to generate some momentum early on because they've had so many of these seasons that just feel like they're over by week 8. So they need to be competitive enough where they're still gunning for it at the end of the season. But weeks 12 through 15, Cards, Titans, Colts, Jets, if it's going to happen, that's going to be the stretch. Why not, Jeff? We'll play it.